Please welcome our next speaker, Miss Renate Frydman, whose husband, Charles, lost his mother and two younger sisters in the death camp of Treblinka. He was able to escape and join the partisans in the Polish forest, fighting against the Nazis. Renee's own family, the Mays, escaped Nazi Germany on Kristallnacht. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Frydman.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the staff and the people from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for being committed to having this day and this program for the third year. It's my great honor to participate in this. I gave up some of my time for Sam because there was no way that you wouldn't want to hear the rest of his story. And I want you to know Sam will be 93 years old in April.
She's 120.
And he is probably one of the most unusual people you will ever meet or hear in your life, because what he's been through, it really could not be described in 30 minutes, but you got some flavor of what happened to him and how he was able to survive even today with many medical problems and come here with great difficulty to speak to you, because that's how important he feels it is. And that's how important I've felt all these years that I've encouraged survivors to speak, even knowing that it was so difficult for them, because how else would the world know what happened except first-person stories? And we will be among the last to hear these first-person stories. They will be in movies, they will be on tape, they will be on television, but never again will you hear that first-person voice. So that is a really special thing today that you heard, and there was no way I was going to stop him. As for my story, it's quite different. I'm just going to cut it short so that you will be able to leave on time. But I would have been one of the 1.5 million Jewish children that were killed had I not had a grandfather in Germany with great vision, who somehow, even though he'd been a soldier for Germany in the First World War, and my family, which was Jewish on both sides, went back hundreds of years, would I be here today? My grandfather saw somehow what was happening in Germany was not going to stop, that it was going to get worse. And when someone threw a rock on my baby carriage from our apartment building in Frankfurt, he said he had to leave and he had to make a new life for me, and he had to come to the only country that people ever want to come to for freedom and life, and that was the United States of America. He was able to get here through cousins in about 1937, and it took 1.5 years until he found a man, a stranger in New York City, who would sign the papers so that my parents and my grandmother and I could get here. I was very young, so I can't take any credit for that. However, I feel, although I left the Holocaust behind, it has followed me throughout my life, and I've felt a strong compulsion to continue to have you hear the voices of people who went through it. Unfortunately, my own husband, my late husband, who passed away almost 13 years ago suddenly, his voice was stilled. However, through, I don't know, some good fortune, I had taped him through 20 years of living with him. We were married over 50 years when he passed. And I taped him at various times, and he didn't speak much to audiences because it was difficult for him. And so I had about 7 tapes of his story. Although I knew it quite well and I did it with him, I put them away when he passed away for 7 years because I could not hear his voice telling those stories. But finally I said, I have to listen. And when I started listening, it was like I heard them for the first time. And I started writing them down. I'm a writer, a journalist, and by profession, and I started transcribing all those tapes. I started doing that it's been a long, long period of time, because when I did the first tapes, it's been 30 years ago. And now finally, with the help of my daughter, I finished a story, which may be a book, I hope, of his experiences. The fact is that none of us would believe that we could live through the things that you heard Sam live through, or the things that my late husband lived through, or even that Ira lived through. We don't believe that we have that capacity, and yet we have that resilience of human spirit, that we can reach down into ourselves and become extraordinary people if we have to do it. And that's one of the main lessons, I think, that the Holocaust leaves us. So his story was similar in some ways to Sam's, but yet quite different, because he also was born in Poland in a small town, and his parents had, his father was a butcher, and they had a small, sort of a farm, and just some animals. And he also was living a nice, quiet life until the Germans came in 1939, and as Poland fell very quickly. But his parents, his father was taken away to a camp. He didn't know where. It was Treblinka. And then he and his mother and two sisters were taken to a ghetto area in Białystok, yes. And when the roundups came to take people, they had to walk to a train station, to a train, to go on the train, to go to a death camp. That's how, and many people were killed even along the way to the train stations. And somehow his mother, her name was Hannah, she must have felt that of her 3 children, she had 2 daughters and the son, who was the oldest, that maybe he could survive whatever was coming. And she got him on one of the trucks that went out every day to take people to work. And even there, almost at the death knell, she got him on one of those trucks, and he was able to get on the truck. He was about 13 years old. He did not look Jewish. He was very blonde. He had light complexion, but he got on the truck to go to work with other Jewish people. There was someone on the truck with a gun and a rifle. But when they got near his city, there was a bridge and a cemetery, and when the truck slowed down, he jumped off the truck, although there was the man with the gun, and he ran, and the man did not shoot him because there were so many people on the truck, he was unable to even fire at him, and he ran and hid in the cemetery. And from then on, at the age of 13, he was on his own, throughout the war. His mother and 2 sisters, later he found out, were taken also to Treblinka, as was his whole family, all his close family. He managed to find his way to a Polish farmer that his family had known and asked to stay there, and they kept him for a short time in the barn. Even the son of the people, the Polish people, could not know that he was there in the barn, because even though he'd gone to school with my late husband, he would perhaps have told the Germans that he was hiding in the barn, and the whole family would have been killed for hiding him. And shortly after a few weeks, the farmer came in and said, "You can't stay here anymore, it's too dangerous." And so he had to leave and find his way to different workplaces. The remarkable thing about his story is that he escaped everywhere he was caught. He always escaped from it. He ended up in a work camp, and it was in a small town. Again, they rounded up people. Although I've been able to find on the maps of Poland almost every city, but I cannot find this one. It was a place near the Sola River, they were loading bombs. They were forced to load bombs on planes for the Wehrmacht to carry out their bombing raids to Russia. But he managed to escape, and the only place he could go at that point was Radom, which was a very large ghetto too, and he found there an uncle and he stayed with him a short time, and they were starting to round up people in the Radom ghetto. Night by night, there were screamings and killings, and he couldn't take it. His uncle said, you know, I'll hide you, keep you here with my family, but Charlie was unable to do that. He couldn't stand it, and he said, get me out, and his uncle managed to get him out of the ghetto, and then he found another place to stay. This went on until he was in one place where there were over 400 men, women, and children working in a camp, and they took the whole lineup and cut it in half. The Nazis, there were Ukrainians, there were different people who were helping the Nazis, and they all had guns, and half of them were sent back into the barracks. He was 4 away from the cut-off line, and the rest were killed right on the spot. He saw all this terror, all this killing, and yet remained a human being, very much of a human being, as you can see, Sam. I think the other remarkable thing about almost everyone I've ever met, and I've met almost all the survivors in Dayton, was that they remained humane, in spite of everything that they had seen, all the killings, all the horror, all the devastation. They remained very human, and all at the end they wanted to do was to be in a safe place and have a family and live a normal life. It's a really remarkable thing, I think. He was not one of the ones killed that day. Eventually, he was taken on another truck with other young men to a place called Peony, which is still on the map. It's the only ammunition factory in Poland was in that a small town. And he was put to work with other young people to make parts for the ammunition that the Germans would use in their quest to rule the world, which they never did, fortunately. And his only thought when he got there was, this is going to be more difficult to get away because there were 7 times around barbed wire. The most remarkable part of his story, I think, is the story of how he managed to escape this place. He had plans to go with about 7 other men and meet at night and escape from there, but the German that he worked for called him just at that time when he was supposed to go with them and bring some food to some of the workers, and he didn't go. And those 7 men were all caught as they were escaping the camp, and they were hung the next morning. And he still wanted to escape. To make this not as long a story as it could be, he ended up with one other man shortly thereafter, getting all the way to the 7 times through the barbed wire with the small instrument they found to almost escape, and then they were caught, he by an older soldier and the other man by 2 other soldiers, and he managed to hit the older man. He had been drinking, you could tell from his breath. He managed to hit him, and he started to run into the forest, and that's where he ended up spending the rest of the war, almost 3 years, in the forests of Poland. And I will tell you that they fought the Germans in the forests. They were called partisans. Some of you may have seen the movie Denial, although, what was it? The movie that showed the escape and the living in the forests. And he lived in the forest. And this is not like when people are camping, you have supplies with you. When people are trained as soldiers, they carry supplies with them. They have learned the best tactics to survive. The Jews and others who hid in the forest, did so without any prior training or even any idea of what it was going to be like, and yet they were able to live within the forest, find food, sometimes from farms on the edges of the forest, and maintain their little bit of existence and try to live to survive to see the end of the war and when Germany would finally be defeated. And he managed to do that quite well, actually. As young as he was, they sent him to the villages on paroles. to see what was in the villages, if there were Germans around, and because of his looks, somehow he managed to do that. He went sometimes with the older partisans, they were called, the people who lived in the forest and fought against the Germans, to try to blow up a bridge. One time he did get wounded in his leg. He had a scar from that. It was a survival that was most difficult, knowing that he probably would never see his parents or his sisters or any of his family again. And yet there was this tremendous will to keep going and get away from the bad places and live to see the end of the war, which actually, fortunately, he was able to do. When the war was over, when they were liberated by the Russians, and they were taken in and questioned, and they were finally let go, and he was able to go back to his hometown, which was near Radom, Poland. It was a small town called Jeglins. He went back there, and in that small town of several thousand Jews, only 10, and he was one of them, survived to come back. They lived in that town for a short time until they were told that they had to leave or they would be killed. This was when the war was over. And they ended up, some went to, they went to Germany, and from there some went to Israel, some went to Brazil, and some went to the United States. As a citizen of choice from the age of 9, I can tell you there is nothing I am prouder of than being an American citizen. And that is something that I hope each of you who were born here and who were lucky enough to be born here will never take for granted, because I do not take my citizenship and my being a U.S. citizen for granted. I vote, and I try to be a good citizen. And I know that all of you, especially those in the armed forces and those of you who aren't, do that too. The stories of the Holocaust are so incredibly amazing and have to be told as long as we can tell them. And we are deeply grateful to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for allowing us this time to give you a brief idea of what went on. As one of the people who could have been one of the 1.5 million children killed, and I certainly would have been when they came to our apartment in Frankfurt and looked for us, and we were gone. We were headed to the train station, which is my first memory in life, the train station in Frankfurt. I would have been one of those children. I could have left it behind, but yet I couldn't, because there is so much to learn from these experiences and so much to find within ourselves that we can do to make the world a better place. So I will leave you with the thought that the only thing evil really needs to survive is for good men and women to do nothing. Thank you very much.
I just like to add a few words. Those who deny the Holocaust ever happened, I only wish they would be in the ghettos and the concentration camps like me. I wonder if they would still deny the Holocaust. And I like to add another thing. After deliberation, I only weighed 75 pounds. So now I'm